Salutations, Imperial citizens and battle brothers. Today is the day when the men lay siege to the enemy. That's right, we are going on an in-depth analysis into the Anvil Siege Force, which is often lamented as one of the worst detachments in Codex Space Marines. But how did we get there? The day was a cold Friday in the midst of January. I was lying in bed, not knowing what to do with myself, for I had no tournament to play. The event I signed up for was booked out, and I was fifth in the queue for any reserve list purposes. That was until suddenly I was rung awake by a phone call. Apparently, 3 people on the list got sick, and another 3 people had a devastating issue with their car. So I was asked, "Would you like to come in tomorrow?" And so I did. With zero preparation, not knowing anything about the terrain or the missions, I decided to grab one of my random lists and hit the Discord for last minute fine tuning. The Discord in question, of course, being the realm of Ultramar. If you want to meet other Ultramarine fans or want to ask me about your next army list in person, consider joining up. The Anvil Siege Force is supposedly one of, if not the weakest detachment in the Codex. But I believe it has some genuinely amazing tools to exploit, if you know what you are doing. The detachment rule is called Shield of the Imperium. It turns all your ranged weapons into heavy weapons. In addition, if your weapon used to be heavy already, you get +1 to wound in addition to your +1 to hit if you remain stationary. This rule isn't amazing because it is very hard to play a game of 40k without moving all the time. If you stand still, you can't be out of sight, you can't move onto objectives, and you can't move in order to see the enemies you couldn't see before. That said, +1 to wound is a really strong ability, and if you are hitting on 2s, you basically don't need Oath of Moment to do damage. The way I advise you to use this rule is primarily opportunistically. Stay still if it is convenient, otherwise you just play normal 40k. You can use a few tricks like Rapid Ingress to guarantee yourself a turn of heavy buffs, which is also very good. On a positive note, a lot of Space Marine units are actually equipped with heavy weapons. Intercessors, heavy intercessors, hellblasters, eradicators, even some vehicles like the Gladiator Lancer have weapons equipped with the heavy weapon subtype. It also buffs all of your pistol weapons if you stay in combat, so it isn't crazy to run Inceptors or assault intercessors in this detachment too. The enhancements in the Anvil Siege Force range from mostly okay to pretty strong. Fleet Commander only goes on a captain and is a very unreliable way of doing a few mortal wounds. This one isn't worth taking and you can safely ignore it. Indomitable Fury lets the carrier get back up on a 2-up with full runes remaining, but is locked to Gravis characters. The restriction is a tragedy because this would have been awesome on a lone op, but it is still very solid on a Gravis captain with half damage. Stoic Defender gives its units a 6-up Feel No Pain while it is in range of and in control of an objective marker. A restriction, but also supported by its secondary ability, which states that OC is only halved instead of reduced to 0 while the unit is battle shocked. This enhancement is very good to mess with damage-free math in your free wound Gravis models, and I would consider this one an auto take. Last but not least, we have Architect of War. This fairly expensive enhancement allows the Bearer's unit to ignore cover. This is genuinely a pretty substantial buff and the only source of AP boosting in this detachment. I would also consider this one an automatic pick. I have a lot of things to say about the stratagems, but let's start with the easy ones. Armor of Contempt is weaker than it used to be, but will keep a unit alive through one individual activation. Worsening the AP of incoming attacks is still strong, and it works with other defensive rules layered on top of it. Hail of Vengeance is a 2 CP stratagem and allows a unit of yours to shoot back if it lost a model in the shooting phase. This stratagem unfortunately doesn't give you the heavy bonus, since it isn't your turn, and it's too expensive to be useful. I have not used it once, but I at least like to tell my opponents about it just to scare them a little bit. Simple but effective is what I would describe no threat to great. A 2 command point stratagem which allows any unit in your army to reroll wounds against vehicles or monsters in shooting. It's a steep price, but if you absolutely need to kill something, this will get the job done. Battle Drill Recall is very interesting. At baseline, you pay 1 command point to give a unit sustained hits 1 in shooting. This isn't bad, but usually not worth a command point. However, if you manage to stay stationary, you get critical hits on 5+. This is actually kind of absurd for a few reasons. Number 1, anything with indirect fire can use this stratagem and Oath of Moment to fire some really accurate artillery shots into enemy units. Desolation Marines appreciate this buff a lot. Second, you get to combo this with any source of lethal hits, say a Lieutenant or an Apothecary Biologist, to replicate the old Fire Discipline combo. If you manage to set this up, you are going to roll something off the table. Speaking of setup, not 1 backward step gives you the ability to paint 1 command point in order to double the OC of any infantry unit on an objective. The caveat, you have to remain stationary. Now, what most people don't realize about this stratagem, remain stationary is a game action chosen in the movement phase. Every action in 40k has to either make a normal move, fall back, or an advance, or remain stationary. This doesn't, however, prevent you in any way from charging or using a Fire and Fate ability once the movement phase is over. You can use this stratagem while strong to one objective, to charge onto another, or to charge off of it after scoring your primary. Not 1 backward step is really good at scoring an extra objective out of nowhere. Even 1 surviving intercessor can suddenly be an OC4 model, which is really hard to outscore. Where the stratagem truly gets hilarious is on an Apothecary Biologist after the Vivispectrum has been triggered. This doubles your OC of 9 into an OC of 18, which is basically impossible to contest. At last, we arrive at the crown jewel of the Anvil Siege Force. Rigid Discipline is a 1 CP stratagem and allows you to make a fallback move at the end of the fight phase under 2 conditions. Number 1, you have to be engaged in combat. Number 2, you have to end your fallback move wholly within your deployment zone or within range of an objective marker. This might seem innocent at first glance, but you are falling right into the trap if you do. The general use for this stratagem is to fall back at the end of your opponent's turn. Do that and you can stand still to get your heavy weapon bonus online. This stratagem goes way further than that, however. First, notice how it says the fight phase, not your fight phase. That means you can make a fallback move in the same turn as you declare the charge. This gives you a free movement. Nothing on Rigid Discipline prevents you from ending the move on the same objective marker as the one you started at either. You can keep 1 model in range and proceed to string out with a massive unit, or use a charge and this stratagem to hop from one objective to another. Since your move is a fallback move, you are always able to gamble on desperate breakouts and can use it to walk straight through enemy models too. On top of many tricks, your opponent's rules have a really hard time interacting with Rigid Discipline too. Due to the timing being the fight phase and the move being a fallback move, many reactive moves or things like Overwatch don't work against it. Mastering Rigid Discipline is how you master the Anvil Siege Force, and I will show some of my tricks later in the video. Let us get to the list. My list for the event started out like many others, with Marneus Calgar. Marneus Calgar will join a unit of aggressors with an Apothecary Biologist carrying Architect of War to ignore cover. If this unit ever gets to stay still, it will relive the glory days of the Gladius Fire Discipline. in addition to proving us with some much needed melee counterpunch. Uriel Ventress is our second character, joined by his trusty company heroes. This unit is surprisingly capable of flipping objectives, since doubling your OC works with the banner to give you a surprise OC free. In addition to his usual stratagem denial aura, Uriel also gives the deep strike keyword to a unit of 6 eradicators. This unit will try to rapid ingress and shoot stationary, +1 to wound melter shots at any target I deem fit to die. The third model in the company is a Gravis Captain with Bolt Rifle. He carries the Stoic Defender enhancement to give a 6-up Feel No Pain and OC support to a squad of 10 heavy intercessors. Our sole battle line unit of the day is one intercessor squad. They sticky any objective they hold at the end of the turn and shoot extra hard at one target at a time. They do have heavy weapons, so under the right circumstances, this can really hurt. 5 scouts provide us with a turn 1 throwaway unit that can always score a card or move block an enemy scout move. They do have a heavy bolter, but don't expect that to come up. 2 additional squads of eradicators provide us with more can openers, and they double up as annoying scoring units. Tagging them is dangerous, thanks to rigid discipline leading into a heavy boosted salvo of melter, and I use them as speed bumps to slow other targets by just charging them. To make up for our lack of speed, I have decided to run 2 squads of suppressors. They move 12 and can score a lot of secondaries between that and the deep strike rule. They provide debuffs too, though I was mostly interested because they are heavy. To round out the list, we see 2 Ballista Dreadnoughts. These guys are not heavy, but they don't require Oath of Moment and are durable, long-range guns to keep your opponent honest. Round 1. Chaos Knights, Traitorous Lance. The mission was Linchpin with a relatively open firing lane in the center. I deployed my heavy intercessors on it to guarantee the Linchpin home objective and to stay stationary and look at the center objective. One flank was covered by the Ballista Dreadnoughts, pre-measuring the walk and shoot ranges of the Brigands, and the other by Marnir's Kalgar and the Aggressors with some layers of suppressors. 1 Eradicator squad in both places as support. This game was surprisingly one-sided. Whenever my opponent moved a Knight out, I killed it with my superior firepower. The Gravis Marines were a pain for the little guns to chew through, and the company heroes turned all their hit on 2s, wound on 2 attacks into inconsistent swings, while Uriel in the center of the map just taxed all of their walk through walls stratagems for a long time. I deep struck the 6 Eradicators into their backfield, forcing some of the Brigands to turn around and deal with them. By turn 5, I killed 11 War Dogs and dominated the primary, including a 2 CP play in which I used Insane Bravery and not one backward step on 3 Intercessors to steal an objective marker from a War Dog opposite side of the wall. Space Marine victory. The follow-up game was fought against one of my pals and constant companion on the passenger seat in my car. Good old Canoptech Court Necrons, trying to bully the primary with OC, while the Doomstalkers provide shooting aid. The deployment was sweeping engagement and the mission was Scorched Earth, which caused me a bit of trouble because screening my backfield proved to be a difficult task. Uriel Ventress is clutch here, to tax their reactive move stratagem, and to use rigid discipline to get around Overwatch is also really important. I went second, but unfortunately had a bad turn 1. I drew bad cards, lost most of my aggressors, failed my advance onto the side objective with a reroll, and my opponent started with turn 1 containment and area denial for an 11 victory point lead. But the game got better after that. It boiled down to this very specific scenario. I used a mix between walking, charging, and falling back via rigid discipline to move closer to my opponent's home objective, on which I had placed a lone Eradicator in combat with 5 Immortals. The battle line was allowed to advance in action, so I put myself on his home objective with 5 models, triggering the reactive move of some nearby Wraiths towards the objective. The Necron OC was 16, 3 Wraiths, and 5 Immortals. My OC was 13, 6 Heavy Intercessors, and 1 Eradicator. I fell back and oafed the Immortals to shoot them with my suppressors. I shot, wounded 8 times, and all 5 passed all 8 free-up cover saves. Yeah, that was brutal. Thanks to that, I had to shoot with my Heavy Intercessors to clear the point for regular primary while burning another marker elsewhere. But had I gotten at least 2 kills, the objective would have flipped and I could have burned it for 10 points. The game ends with 94 points on me and 95 on my opponent. I lose by 1 victory point. Considering how bad my opening turn went, I definitely managed to bounce back really well, but very frustratingly I could not prevent the Ophidians from scoring 3 secondary cards in my backline. A unit of infiltrators would have really helped here. Round 3, last but not least, we are fighting Grey Knights on regular old Take and Hold. The most mobile army in the game versus the most immobile army in the game. I go second, which means the scoring advantage goes to the player who goes in and out of reserves all game. This might be the worst case scenario, meaning I have to make a plan, get aggressive. I screen my backline with a Ballistas and my Intercessors, move the heavies up onto their favorite objective and put Calgar behind a wall. The Ballistas start plinking into Canis Rex while the scouts go into the center to move block the big knight from hitting my lines. My opponent decides to go all in too. Canis goes center, 2 Dread Knights and 2 Librarians shoot and kill every aggressor and biologist to leave Calgar alone, and my entire army is now in combat. But this isn't as bad of a spot as it could be. Calgar manages to almost kill a Dread Knight in combat by himself, and the Heavy Intercessors fall back to avoid Mists of Demos to shoot freely at everything. My reserves drop in, Uriel goes mid-board, and the fight is on. My barrage of anti-tank kills Canis Rex, and I shoot a Dread Knight to death. Only 1 remaining, excluding the Grandmaster, who teleported out after being targeted. I scored some cards and used Rigid Discipline and Uriel Ventress to prevent any and all Mists of Demos shenanigans from happening. The Librarians, stuck in combat for the entire game, cannot leave the table due to the timing on their rules and stratagems. I bleed about 2 Intercessors per turn going forward, but I get to shoot and charge my entire unit into those Librarians every single turn. After I kill the Grey Knights down to 2 wounded Strike Marine squads, the Home Field Navigator and the Grandmaster, I overwhelm the primary with bonus OC on demand and successfully win a very close game. Space Marines victory. The Anvil Siege Force ended up going 2-1, which is a very formidable finish for what many consider to be one of the worst detachments in the game. I think with a bit of fine-tuning, the Ultramarines can run a really strong Anvil Siege Force. I want to experiment more with pistol units going forward and maybe add a Hammer Strike to help with the AP1 issue. I sincerely hope this was a helpful guide to the Anvil Siege Force. Please give this list a try if you want to style on people by falling back during their turn, and I hope to see you next time. Courage and honor.